Hola, ¿qué tal? Soy Dani Mantilla y seguimos aquí en Kinótico haciendo más entrevistas desde la 69 edición del Festival de Valladolid, no San Sebastián. Estamos en la Seminci y tenemos con nosotros a Sarah Friedland, que es la directora de una película que arrasó en el Festival de Venecia en la sección Horizonte, que además ganó el premio a la mejor ópera prima de toda la programación, y en Horizonte se llevó mejor dirección para ella y mejor actriz. O sea que es una película que hay que seguir muy de cerca. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
How does it feel to be here in Valladolid for the first time?
It's wonderful. I'm really excited to explore the city.
How has been traveling with this film? Because it had its world premiere in Venice,
Mm.
where it was a huge success. I was talking about that now. How was releasing the film, letting it go?
Hmm. I mean, it's been a wonderful experience because I think with this film, because it's quite emotional and it strikes people in a personal way, it elicits very kind of personal stories from people, and so it's been a real privilege to travel with it because after screenings, after Q&As, people will come up to me and talk to me about their parents, their grandparents, their own experience of aging, about nurses and caregivers in their lives, and so it's been really special to get to sort of kind of be the recipient of all of these sort of very tender stories and experiences.
It has to be a really emotional thing because then the movie is not yours anymore and it starts affecting a lot of people
Yeah.
because it's a really universal thing and something that we don't usually watch
Hmm.
in a film or in a TV show.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of love that though, because it took almost a decade to make, so it's been mine for a very long time, and so it feels great to be able to sort of turn it over and say, okay, now it's yours, and that's what I really love about cinema is that a film can be different things for different people, and you can project your own life onto it, and the film can withstand all of these different people putting their own emotions onto it and their own histories, and then I get sort of little reverberations back. So it's wonderful to be able to kind of give it over and to say, okay, it's no longer mine, it's
Mhm.
yours. And
Why did you decide to tell this story? Because you're a young filmmaker,
mm,
you're still quite far from this experience.
yeah,
But why Familiar Touch
yeah.
for your first film?
I mean, it started with my own grandmother. My paternal grandmother was a poetry editor
Mhm.
and an intellectual, and someone who really she placed her sense of self identity in her language and her verbal expression. And when I was a teenager and she developed dementia, she became nonverbal. And my family started speaking about her in the past tense as if she were no longer there. And yet she was so present and so expressive in other ways. She would rock, she would tap rhythms, her sense of touch was really heightened. And that space in between how we spoke about her as if she were absent and how she was very much present really kind of haunted me for many
Mhm.
years. Cut to a decade later, I was working in film production, had the privilege of working for some really wonderful directors.
Steve McQueen, Gary
Yeah,
Reichardt.
yeah, and I worked on HBO's Girls, a lot of independent films. I
And
really
girls,
kind of,
also,
yeah, I worked on
I love
Girls.
girls.
Yeah, I got to really sort of cut my teeth with some wonderful filmmakers and learn the ropes, as they say. And I realized that I reached a point where I wasn't learning about human beings outside of a film set, and so I decided I needed to make money a different way, and so I became a caregiver for New York City artists with dementia, and I did that job part time for about 3.5 years, and that led me to teaching filmmaking to older adults. And the relationship I had with my clients and then with my students, who were all in their 80s and 90s,
Mhm.
really changed how I thought about aging. Um, I noticed that so many of them, despite being, 70 years older than me, saw me as a peer, that our relationship wasn't so much determined by age, where they were the older and I was the younger, but that we could identify as friends or me as their assistant or their sister. And the fluidity of age identity really fascinated me, that they had access to a younger version of themselves and that could be there in the present with them. And that's what really convinced me. I already had a rough draft of the
Mhm.
script, but it convinced me to use the coming of age genre to kind of look at this moment of transition and transformation
Mhm.
rather than seeing age as an experience of decline.
And how was the search of, well, at the end of the film, we see like a line in the credits where you say that you filmed this Familiar Touch with caregivers and patients. how was working around that and setting the limits, like we can do this, we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the most important component was that we needed to be with Ruth, our protagonist's perspective. You know, when you think about the films that have already been made about aging and about memory loss, they're usually from the perspective of a loved one who is either the child or the partner of someone who is aging, and we're rarely with the person themselves. And so I knew that we needed to be in Ruth's perspective and that we could see, you know, we could see moments of loss or moments of sort of shift in her cognitive ability and her ability to sort of move around the social world and her everyday life. But we needed to always be with her. And same thing, I wanted to honor the perspective of the caregivers, but from Ruth's perspective. So that was the biggest constraint for us, and knowing that, okay, whatever we see in this film, we are with her and we're with her experience of it, rather than it being a sort of symptom that somebody else sees from the outside. Because I think at the end of the day, as much as, yes, it's a film about aging, yes, our character has memory loss, but I think it's really a film about our relationship to our shifting self-identity and how life continues despite these shifts that we go through at different stages of life.
How was casting Kathleen Chalfant? How did she shape the character?
I mean, she's extraordinary, and I learned, this is my first time working with professional actors, and I learned so much from her. She's
She did Angels in America.
She did Angels in America. I mean, she has such a brilliant history as an actor, and she's so precise and so generous as a collaborator. She really made me feel, as a first timer, completely trusted, which is a very empowering thing to feel as a first time feature director, to have someone like her just say, you know, I trust you completely. We had quite a sort of playful experience collaborating together, because one of the liberties of this script that I wrote is that it doesn't have a sort of a kind of traditional narrative arc. We get to stay with Ruth in the present, and sometimes she's a younger version of herself, sometimes she's a more lucid 80-year-old version of herself, but we get all of these Ruths. And so we really got to treat each scene as its own moment in time, and she would surprise me, you know, in showing up as a sort of flirty 20-year-old Ruth in moments where I didn't know that's what would come out. And so it was wonderful also as a scriptwriter, because by the time we filmed, I had revised it so many times. We had waited so long to make it. The script felt kind of dried out, and she brought this character to life. And she's spoken a bit about how she really was trying to honor her best friend. Her best friend, Sybil Pearson, is a acclaimed American playwright who is at the exact same stage in her dementia as Ruth is at the beginning of the script when we started filming. So I think for her, there was a process of also kind of channeling her observations of her best friend.
How hard was it to find the money for this film? Because we rarely see stories with elderly people in the
Yeah.
heart of the film. I'm
Yeah.
thinking this year, for example, Thelma with June Squibb,
Yeah.
but it's quite rare.
Yeah. I mean, it took a long time. I think not only is it hard to see stories about older adults, but hard to see stories of older women and their sexuality. I mean, that's a big part of the film, is that really wanting to honor the continuity of her desires. I think it's one of the ways that ageism and sexism show up on screen, that we don't see older women as continuing to be sexual people. And so that's also a hard thing to convince funders of, you know, that is a sexy topic, if you will. So it took a long time, and you know, we had to sort of look to non-traditional funding sources. So a lot of grants and some wonderful philanthropists that came on board. Panavision gave us equipment for free. You know, it was sort of pieced together in a kind of scrappy, independent way. But what the gift of that is that everyone who came to the film, you know, really, really believed in what we were doing. And so it was a sort of ragtag team that assembled, but it took many, many years.
Do you feel that the industry is forgetting the older audiences? Because in Spain, for example, we have now like national help funding. People over 65 can go to the cinemas on Tuesdays for
Yeah.
€2. It has been a huge success.
Yeah.
And it has made some smaller films a hit
Yeah,
because of this.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, globally, we're experiencing this demographic shift where, aging populations, older adults are sort of one of the largest growing populations. And I think, unfortunately, the history of aging on screen has been quite infantilizing. Usually, it sort of films fall into two categories. Either it's sort of this, old people say the darndest things and kind of older adults are the butt of a joke, or it's a depiction of aging as just a descent into tragedy. And I think these two kind of extremes really don't respect the the continuity of older adults and how they continue to be themselves and that they are in fact adults just like us.
Mhm.
And so I think we do need to do a better job of creating cinema that speaks to this stage of life, because older adults aren't other from us. We all will be them,
Yeah,
and I don't
luckily.
think, luckily, if
Yeah.
we're lucky, exactly. And so yeah, I do want to see more films that speak to the experience of older adults and the experience of care workers also.
Mhm. You were talking about how long you took to do this film. Sometimes a film arrives talking about similar themes.
Mm,
I'm thinking, for example, they are quite different films. Maite Alberdi, The Mole
mm,
Agent, and last year, The Eternal Memory.
yeah.
Uh, when you find out about these films that talk about something similar, what do you think? It's like,
Mm.
oh my god, yeah.
I mean, yeah, sometimes there's that like moment of panic, but I mean, as you said, there's such different films, and it shows us like how many untold stories and perspectives there are. That you can have the same subject matter, and really the films can be about something completely different. And so in our case, it's a story about an older woman transitioning into a care facility, but it's really a story um, about how life continues and about how our desires find a way to express themselves, no matter the constraints of everyday life. So I think yeah, that subject matter is just sort of one level of a film. Then the treatment of characters, of form, etc., really differentiates films from each other. So
Hmm.
there's room for all of us.
How was the search for the ending? Because like logically you could say she has to die. This story
Mm,
is about that.
mm,
It's really not.
yeah.
How when did you come up with the ending of Familiar Touch?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because one of the questions that I often get in a Q&A is why didn't you end with the dance scene, and not to give away too much to viewers, but there's a sort of climactic moment that isn't the last scene of the film. It was clear to me that we needed to end on a moment of kind of everyday activity, that the film starts with her dressing herself and it ends with her being dressed by a caregiver. And that I knew that we needed to return to that relationship between our protagonist and her main caregiver at that point, who is not her son, but is a professional care worker. Because that's the person who she's going to spend the majority of her remaining days with, is this professional caregiver rather than her family member. And so the sort of climactic moment is kind of a false ending in a way, even though it's the more romantic moment. I knew it needed to end with sort of the banality of care work.
And you were talking about the work with Kathleen, the actress.
Mm,
What about the search of the visual style of the film?
mm. Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky to work with the same cinematographer and production designer for the last 10 years, Gabe
Hmm.
Elder and Stephanie Osen Cohen. And we've been making hybrid dance films together.
Hmm.
And so the three of us have really been able to kind of develop a vocabulary together. And what we sought to do with the kind of visual, formal grammar of the film was to locate Ruth's perspective in her senses rather than her cognition or her visual perspective. We often think about films being from the perspective of a character, and then it's kind of an ocular
Hmm.
perspective. And in this case, we really wanted to honor how she made sense of the world through her other senses, through her body, so through touch, taste, smell. And so we thought about how do we create how do we create a visual language for the film that represents that? And so that meant sort of a lot of static frames that are very kind of attuned to little details in her body, having repetition of the composition whenever certain gestures occur. So there's always these like echoes or reverberations between gestures in the film. So the viewer can almost sort of feel in their body, this feels like something I've seen before. It meant also kind of allowing for sort of some surrealism to come in because of the attention to these sort of little tactile details, and to let the surrealism kind of emerge from an enhancement of that sensation. And the reason we did that is because I think something that people don't know about older adults with memory loss is that even as your cognition declines, all your other senses are often intensified. And so we wanted to represent the world cinematically through that intensification of sensation. And so, yeah, all of the kind of choices around production design, lighting, framing were built around that idea.
And you also come from a choreography background, so
Yes.
it makes sense with everything you were saying right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thinking about building the visual world through Ruth's body.
Sometimes, at least here in Spain, the difficult film is the second one, not the first one. Have you already been working in ideas for a new film?
I have. It's a little too soon to share them, but I've started writing the next one, and I hope it's not more difficult than the first one, because the first one was very hard to make.
Well,
But if it is, I'm ready.
after everything that happened in Venice, it should be easier.
I hope so. I hope the Lions
Yeah.
give it a little push.
I wanted to ask you about that night because it was really important when you decided to speak up, to speak out, and you denounce like the genocide
Yeah.
and the occupation. How was your thought before that speech, and what has been the response? Because sometimes it has been pretty hard
Yeah.
when people has spoken up.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I feel it's my responsibility as both a Jewish director and an American director to speak out against Israel's genocide in Palestine, and now, of course, their violence in Lebanon as well. I think. I knew, of course, that there would be some negative reactions as well, but on the whole, I've experienced a lot of solidarity and support from other filmmakers around the world, and that's been really wonderful to receive.
It was crazy because last year in the Oscars, well, this year in the Oscars, people reacted really heavily against Jonathan Glazer
Yeah.
when he said something really logical. It's
Yeah.
like, does this offend you really?
Yeah. Well, and I think also part of what he spoke to is that we need to know our own history, and we need to be attentive to how our histories are recalled and utilized in the present day. So yeah, I hope for peace very soon.
Do you think things are changing in Hollywood about the way Israel is discussed? Because I remember Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz wrote and opened it like 15 years ago, saying the same thing that now, but before everything that has happened since. And they were super criticized.
It's hard for me to say because I'm coming from the world of making experimental films. So I don't feel like I have a really good overview of Hollywood, but I'll just say that I believe that filmmakers should be able to speak the truth.
Have you already shown the film to Steve McQueen, to Kelly Reichardt?
No, I mean, it just came out at Venice. It's a little early, but I would love to one day. Yeah.
Are you nervous about their feedback?
I hadn't thought about it until you asked me. No, I wouldn't say I'm nervous. I had wonderful support when I worked for them, so
They should be proud.
I
I think so, yeah.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Enjoy Valladolid, and let's hope
Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions.
some distributor buys the film because it's really universal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seguimos aquí con más entrevistas y ya sabéis que podéis ver Familiar Touch aquí en Seminci, que esta misma tarde pasa por primera vez. Gracias.